I want to ask you a question first of all. How did you feel in your heart when you listened to this person speak to you last Thursday? Is it true that you knew he was wrong, but you didn't know how to answer him? Well, I want to say that this is a good feeling for a patriotic American. The simple reason is this, that this man is a product of a long series, or many generations of telling half-truths and lies. You and I are used to telling small lies. This man that spoke to you last week was a man who was well practiced in telling half-truths. I think it's very obvious, but I might tell you that this man, of course, was part of the great international Jewish communist conspiracy that is trying to take over the world. If you noticed his arrogant spirit, his beady eyes, his shifting eyes. Of course, many of the things that he told you are half-truths. Capitalism, for example, in America today is immoral. Capitalism today in America is evil. Why? Because it does serve the interest of a small group. It serves the interests of the Jewish community, of the international Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy that's surrounding America today. Capitalism is only good when it serves the nation's interests. When it serves the nation's interests. And today, of course, it is not. It is not serving the nation's interest. It's only serving a small group. And it's immoral. It's evil. And the government of today, of course, in America is evil. The liberals, the so-called liberals, and the communist conspirators who are in Washington trying to work out in a parliamentary monstrosity called the Congress. How is it possible for 500 fools to make one wise decision? What we need in America today, of course, is a leader who will rise from the people, who will be able to speak for the people, who will be able to speak for the nation's interest, to bring back America to what it used to be when it was strong. Such things as the poverty program he talked about. I ask you, who's poor in America today? Is your father and mother poor? No, they're hard-working, silent Americans. But who are the ones who are making all the trouble? When I say poor, what color do you think of? It's people who are talking about rights. It's people who are talking about equality. Are the people who are in the inferior race. It's not the white American who is poor today, but it's the liberals and the pseudo-intellectuals in Washington who are spending more and more of our money to provide more and more money for the poor, and the poor who do not have to be poor. Now, why is this? Because, again, it's part of the great international Jewish communist Bolshevik conspiracy to make us poorer and poorer so that finally America will not be able to lead the world anymore. He talked about Vietnam. The peace marchers do not want to end the war in Vietnam. They want it to last. The government doesn't want the war to end in Vietnam. It wants it to last. We're spending billions and billions of dollars on this war, and we're becoming poorer and poorer. And soon the conspiracy will take over. We could end the war tomorrow. We could end the war today in Vietnam, and you know it. If we used all of the military means, if we allowed the military to take over, it's strange that this is about the first war where the military does not have full reign in America. Why is it? And then you say, well, what about the newspapers? Don't we get the truth in the newspapers? Do you know that most of the newspapers in America are owned by Jews? Show me where you get a fair picture of the Arab-Israeli situation. The Arabs who are the natural leaders of the Middle East. And all you people do is sit here and smile and clap. Why wasn't I introduced last week or today? Why was he introduced and not myself? You see the conspiracy. The newspapers, the New York Times, the Baltimore Sun, the Washington Post, find out for yourself who controls them. A small group of Jews, international conspirators, to take over America. There's only one newspaper, and you won't find it in your library. Find out why it's not in your library. It's the Thunderbolt. The Thunderbolt is the only non-owned Jewish newspaper in the country. You never heard of it. Of course you didn't, because it's suppressed by the government. Find out about it. Why doesn't the director of our library at Calvin want the Thunderbolt in the library? Why does he have all the other newspapers? What about history? What about the pseudo-intellectuals who sit in the back row? What do they tell you about history and about American history? Decadent ideas from the French Revolution, liberal ideas. Let us reason together. Let us not struggle. Did they, for example, in the course of this year, make history interesting? Why is history so boring? It's a conspiracy. It's not a natural thing. History is supposed to make you patriotic, to make you want to struggle for your country. Why are so many of the troops in Vietnam of an inferior race? And why aren't you young people there wanting to fight and struggle, which is the supreme goal? Have they mentioned in the classes any of our folk heroes? Buffalo Bill, Kid Carson, John Wayne, John Birch. The time is coming when we'll have to act, and I hope you young people will start to do some thinking. Start asking questions. Just don't sit there. Ask questions. Confront your instructors. Make them tell you the truth. Calvin College is becoming a hotbed of liberalism. Now, some of you Grand Rapids people will say, what about Gerald Ford, the blonde, blue-eyed brute that represents us? Find out how many telephone calls he makes to a man by the name of Morgenstern. You'll find out that whenever he needs advice, he asks Morgenstern, who is a Jewish banker in Grand Rapids. And what's even worse, Morgenstern is now on a committee for Calvin College to finance a campaign to raise money for Calvin College. You didn't know that, did you? Find out about these things. Attack. The conspiracy is closing around us. And what we need now is action. That's the answer to. And if I really would be very emotional, I would ask you, all of you, to rise and sing the Star-Spangled Banner. Now, my new hat, to look at Hitler and the rise of Hitler. 1945 saw the end of the second major war of the 20th century. It made the First World War of the 20th century look like a preliminary game to the main event. This was the war that introduced many new words into the vocabulary of war. Total war, ultimate weapon, unconditional surrender, blitzkrieg, final solution, snafu, all very depressing. This was our finest war, almost rivaling the first war the human race had experienced. You remember that war, the battle between Cain and Abel. In that war, 1/2 of the population was involved. And when it was over, 1/4 of the population of the world was dead. We came close to that. War statistics are very depressing. Professor Strickler gave you World War I statistics last week. Multiply this by pi, and you'll have World War II statistics. 20th century man was groping to find answers to what the 19th century had given him in the form of a legacy. Two things in particular. The first was the economic system brought about by the Industrial Revolution. The speed of development outran the ability of society to cope with it. Our scientific abilities seem to be ahead of our moral and spiritual values. We invent a bomb, drop it, and then wonder what we should do about it. Also, the whole economy of the West was liable to extremes of boom and bust, and it had severe repercussions in all parts of the world. The second thing in particular about the 20th century was the international system, the groping of major powers into competing alliances, divided by nationalistic and imperialistic rivalries. This led to 40 years of crisis, war, economic depression. After World War I, the world groped for relief. 19th century theories and movements were explored and made over. Marxism grew into totalitarian Bolshevism. Nationalism gave birth to Nazism and fascism, militarism in Japan. Liberalism expanded into the democratic welfare state. All of these experienced periods of success and failure, but all on their own terms. Today we want to look at one of the most outstanding of the totalitarian regimes, of the right, the Nazis, the rise of Hitler, and try to ask some questions which might help us to understand the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. How is it possible for a man like Hitler to rise in Germany and move the world to its most destructive war? How was he able to rise in power in one of the most civilized countries in Western Europe, a country that had given the world much in history, much in culture, and in science? Now, a great many theories have arisen about this since the time of Hitler. And I would like to explore some of these today and ask some questions concerning them. Professor Max Schnell of the University of Pennsylvania has asked some questions concerning these theories, and he also asked a question at the end of all of this, whether it was Germany's fate or guilt. So what I would say right now is let us mock Schnell mit Schnell. First of these theories, of course, is this. You have it on your paper. The national character of the German people has often been cited as the major cause for the Nazi success. This explanation contended that the German mind, shaped by history and geography, was and is authoritarian, warlike, and intolerant. This explanation for the rise of Nazism to power in 1933 points to the purely German roots of its success, an overemphasis on the powers of the state, an obsession with war, a concern with German expansion to include all Germans outside the frontiers, and a belief in the superiority of the Aryan, Nordic, or Teutonic race. All these are marked features of modern German thought. Cited by this interpretation is Martin Luther's justification of state power in the 16th century. His advice to the princes, you remember, to the nobles, concerning the peasants and the peasants' rebellion. Also is cited by these interpreters is Hegel's philosophy, the German philosopher Hegel's philosophical defense of the Prussian state, about 1800. The state, writes Hegel, is the actuality of the ethical idea. It is ethical mind, knowing and thinking itself, an absolute unmoved end in itself. This final end, her supreme right against the individual, whose supreme duty is to be a member of the state. Thus he regarded the state as a supreme authority almost in a personal sense. He adds, man must therefore venerate the state as a secular deity. Along with the idea of the state supremacy over the individual was the role of war as a necessary instrument in uniting the people. The argument refers to the Blut und Eisen methods Bismarck used in unifying Germany, and the admiration of Bismarck by the German people. The justification of the Prussian military elite in the organization of the state is cited. This quote, "In service to the state through the army, The individual must forget himself and realize how small a thing is his life alone, and something only to be fully realized when merged in the whole. Another philosopher, political philosopher, Treitschke, a political philosopher, in his book, Politik, glorified war. The grandeur of war, he says, is in the utter annihilation of puny man in the great conception of the state. He went out of his way to justify and glorify war and to make it of the greatest prominent importance in the policy of the state. He regarded war as an institution divinely ordained and thought that to banish it from the universe would be to mutilate humanity. In his book, he stated that war is both justifiable and moral, and the idea of perpetual peace is not only impossible, but immoral as well. This book was a bestseller in Germany during the late 1800s. The thinking of Nietzsche, the philosopher Nietzsche, is also used by the people who cite the German roots as an interpretation, or as an interpretation of the rise of Hitler. In his writing, he stressed the Superman notion, the blonde brute. He stressed power, war, and aristocratic leadership, opposition to parliamentary government. Willpower will produce the man. War and courage have done more great things than charity. Christianity, he argued, and he's talking more now about the social gospelers, Christianity argued, in attempting to tame the barbarian, was simply weakening the healthy animal by making it ill. Other philosophers, such as Houston Stewart Chamberlain, a misplaced Englishman and also a son-in-law of the great Wagner, stressed the supremacy of the white race and the Aryan or Teutonic as the finest branch. According to Chamberlain, no true civilization has existed in Europe except where the Teutonic peoples have been dominant. The supremacy of the Aryan in intelligence and energy persisted in his thought. He says, the breakup of the Roman Empire by the Germanic tribes was not a devastating occurrence, but a benefit to mankind. The Roman of the 4th century, according to Chamberlain, degenerate by reason of his Mongol race, was well replaced by the vital and powerful German. Wagner, in his operas, created for the musical public a romantic conception of age-old Germanic culture, of Teutonic gods and heroes. His operas are filled with brave heroes such as Siegfried, who epitomize the blonde Teutonic brute or brave. Also, Wagner, in his writings, feared the Jews as a disintegrating element among the Germans. And along with these, he also attacked the press and democracy. One thing very important about Wagner, of course, is his idea of Volk spirit, the folk spirit, that out of the people, the romantic conception, out of the people will rise a leader to fight against evil, to fight the devils. Everything that Nazism stood for can be found in the roots of Germany, German history, and culture and thinking. Nazi and Hitler were nothing but a result of German history. This interpretation emphasized that democracy and republicanism never was successful in Germany before World War I, and it was installed artificially in 1918 and after 1945 only by the intervention of the Western democracies, and never was really won the real affection of the German people. This theory or interpretation has been used to explain the rise of Hitler. It's been used. For example, it's used by the Nazis themselves in their attempt to convince the German voters that what Hitler had to offer was what the Germans needed. I think very important, this interpretation was also used during World War II by the Allies, by the Allied leaders. That is to justify unconditional surrender. This term of unconditional surrender, which you should think about. Also to justify mass bombing. All the people, all the German people were guilty. All the Japanese people were guilty. It's in the roots of their history. I think it's the justification for dropping the atomic bomb on Japan at the end of World War II. We now know that there were many groups in Japan and in Germany that were very were working very hard against Hitler and against the military regime of Japan, but became very discouraged because of this unconditional surrender terms that the Allies put on them. Also, Russia uses this theory to justify the division of Germany today. If you've plowed through William L. Shire's book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, you find that this is his interpretation. Now, this interpretation is being questioned and being attacked by not only German historians, but also by non-German historians. For example, the late Professor Epstein of Brown University wrote a devastating critique of Shire's book. In it, he states that the German tradition has certain democratic as well as authoritarian roots and practices. He cites Luther, for example. Luther not only was for state power, but he was a religious rebel against the church, the all-powerful church, and he led political rebellion against the emperor. Nietzsche admired French civilization more than German culture, and he hated anti-Semitism. Germany produced many courageous and democratic and intelligent Democrats. The Revolution of 1848 is a good example of this. And after World War I, a large majority of the German people voted in the Weimar Republic. The trouble with this interpretation, its critics say, is that you look for roots after a crime is committed. Now, another major interpretation is for the success of the Nazism is the harsh Treaty of Versailles. You know the terms imposed by the victorious Allies. It stripped Germany of its colonies, 1/10 of her land area, and large percentage of her industrial reserve went to European neighbors. It left her with a small army, while her neighbors kept a large army. Germany had to turn over huge sums of money or equivalent values in commodities to European victors as reparations on the ground that Germany and her allies caused the war. Many German historians and many non-German historians have maintained that the Germans' complaints were at least justified concerning the Treaty of Versailles. It complained that the treaty was unfair and unreasonable. It complained that the new republic, the Weimar Republic, was being punished for mistakes that had been committed by the Kaiser's government. Because the Weimar Republic accepted the terms of the treaty, it was discredited in the eyes of the German people from the very beginning. Myth arose that the German army had never been defeated. As you know, Germany was not invaded in World War I. The military generals had moved out and allowed the Republic to take over. Advocates of this interpretation state that the Treaty of Versailles whipped up nationalism in Germany to a degree never before known. The Nazis capitalized on this resentment of the treaty created against the West. They pointed to the treaty as proof that Germany was surrounded by hostile powers and could rise again by rearming under a strong leader. Problem with this interpretation is that by 1933, when Hitler took over, the Treaty of Versailles had been greatly modified. Military occupation had been ended 5 years ahead of time. Reparation debt had been canceled in 1932. The resentment against the Versailles Treaty is not sufficient explanation for the success of Nazism in 1933. Another interpretation is the failure of the Weimar Republic itself. That is, the moderate democratic leadership, right from the start in 1919, never seemed to be able to solve its major problems. It could not solve how to handle the extremists of the right, the Nazis, and the extremists of the left, the communists. It had far too many parties, many of them splinter parties, trying to form coalitions, and never really gave any leadership. It moved from one crisis to another. Neither did the government seem to be able to control the huge military-industrial complex and the monopolies. The users of this interpretation point to the crisis of 1923 and 1924 as the example of the weakness of the Weimar Republic. But again, in 1928, Germany was quite a stable country, economically and politically. The Weimar Republic seemed to be getting stronger and stronger in 1928. Another theory for the rise of the Nazism is the one concerning Hitler himself. His personality, his leadership ability, his skill as a propagandist is cited by these people as Hitler having unbelievable ability as a swayer of the masses. Alan Bullock, in his biography of Hitler, called Hitler the greatest demagogue in history. Notice, not one of the greatest, but the greatest. Bullock states this: in hours-long speeches against the Versailles Treaty, the Republic leaders, the communists, international finance, Jewish power, Hitler knew how to appeal to the strongest political emotions in Germany after World War I, to a national feeling of persecution and a sense of national insecurity. Along with simple explanations of Germany's plight, Hitler held up a vision, paranoid vision, of what her true place in the world should be. He soothed the German inferiority complex by insisting that the Germans were really a super race. He urged Germans meet the dangers of communism by creating a police state and a greatly expanded nation in Central Eastern Europe. Hitler urged them to solve their economic problems and overpopulation by winning territory for colonization, Lebensraum, living room. Germany was the natural leader in Europe over the Slavic people. Hamilton T. Burden, in his book Nuremberg Party Rallies, 1923 to 39, says this: not only in what Hitler said, but in the way he said it, he proved himself to be a master demagogue. His speeches began in an ordinary tone of voice, rose to a high pitch of emotionalism like that of a madman, became rational again, only to rise once more to hysterical crescendos. As another author put it, he played on German heartstrings as a master violinist. And through technical devices such as the microphone and the radio, which again at that time, 80 million Germans were deprived of independent thought, according to these interpreters. It was therefore possible to subject them to the will of one man. I'd like to hear you listen to part of a record with Hitler's voice. In the first part, you'll hear his voice. I want to apologize for the announcer. He sounds like the senior announcer on WFUR, but try to ignore him. You'll hear Hitler speaking, and then you'll hear the crowds cheering, and then the song I want you to listen to, see if it's familiar. The second part of the tape will also include a speech by Hitler and a translation of it. Right on this stage.
Weil wir der Überzeugung sind, dass die Bande dieser Volksgemeinschaft sich niemals und nirgends lösen. Das, was ihr denkt in dieser Stunde, das, was euch erfüllt, dessen wollen wir nun laut gedenken. Unsere teure Heimat, unser teures deutsches Reich, Sieg heil!
That was the voice of Adolf Hitler, the most ferocious dictator the world has ever known. For 13 years, he led a reign of terror, and during that period, his public appearances created a state of mass hypnosis among his many followers. His speech over, the crowds would shout, "Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil!" and then break forth into joyous song.
You'll hear him speaking now in Vienna.
Hitler continued his conquests. And we hear him now as he spoke in Vienna. The translator seems impressed by Herr Schickelgrupp.
Adolf Hitler himself. Eine Umwälzungsperson, die wir heute wohl in ihrem Umfang sehen, deren Bedeutung aber erst spätere Geschlechter ganz ermessen werden. Es ist in den letzten Jahren von den Machthabern des nunmehr beseitigten Regimes oft von der besonderen Mission gesprochen worden, die in ihren Augen dieses Land zu erfüllen hätte. Ein Führer der Legitimisten hat sie in einer Denkschrift genau umrissen. Nach ihr war es die Aufgabe dieser sogenannten Selbstständigkeit des Landes Österreich, die in den Friedensverträgen fundiert und von der Gnade des Auslandes abhängig war. Die Bildung eines wahrhaft großen...
You are hearing now Chancellor Hitler, who just said a change has taken place, which we are witnessing today, but it will be up to the future generations to value it. It has often been stated that we have to fulfill a mission. And now the Chancellor is explaining which mission shall and must be fulfilled.
Aus allen Gauen des Altreichs hergerufen hat, die älteste Ostmark des deutschen Volkes, sei von jetzt ab das jüngste Bollwerk der deutschen Nation und damit das deutsche Reich.
Chancellor just referred to Austria.
So the citers of the rise of Nazism look to Hitler and to his leadership ability. Yet in 1928, after 9 years of leadership in the Nazi movement, Hitler and the movement itself were failures, repudiated by the great majority of the German people. In the elections of 1928, the Nazi Party won less than 3% of the German vote. The party got only 12 seats out of 491 in the German Reichstag. Party membership stood at only 100,000 out of 80 million. Does all this suggest something about the theories or explanations of the success of the rise of Hitler? It might be this. All the theories that we have mentioned so far were already present in 1928. Historical background, supposedly unchanging national character, the Treaty of Versailles, the Weimar Republic, Hitler's personality and leadership. But we now know that the National Socialist German Workers' Party stood on the brink of success. Now, would you follow closely as I give you some statistics for the following years and see if you can find out the next theory. September 14, 1929, the Nazis in the election, 18.3% of the vote, 107 seats in the 577 Reichstag, in the membership of the Reichstag. December 1930, 4.4 million Germans unemployed. December 1931, 5.66 million Germans unemployed. March 1932, presidential election between Hitler and von Hindenburg. Now, you know von Hindenburg was the Eisenhower of Germany, the old military hero who was to bring the people together. And in that election, Hitler received 11.5 million votes, von Hindenburg 18 million. There was no majority, so they had a runoff in April. In that election, Hitler received 13 million, 37%, von Hindenburg 19.4, he won the election. June 16, heavy street fighting between right and leftist paramilitary groups, between the communists and the Nazis. July 3, 1932 election, the Nazis 13 million, 37% of the vote. They received 230 seats in a 608 Reichstag. The Nazis are now the largest single party in the Reichstag. The Nazi membership, 100,000 in 1928, now 1 million. 400,000 of which are well-armed and disciplined SA and SS troops. In contrast, the German army had 100,000. November 6, 1932 election. The Nazi popular vote reduced to 33.1%, and it was reduced to 196 deputies out of a 584 House. Despite this, other parties cannot come to agreement on the appointment of a chancellor, prime minister. And on January 30, 1933, Hitler appointed chancellor, but the majority of the cabinet members are not of the Nazi party. February 27, 1933, the Reichstag is burned. The Nazis accuse the communists and claim the communist threat that the communists are about to take over the country. Hitler speaks on the radio, and 80 million Germans listen to him. February 28, presidential decree gives Hitler emergency powers to establish law and order. And the reign of terror begins against all opponents of Hitler and the party. March 5, despite unlimited reign of terror, the Nazis failed to get a majority in the election. 43.9%, 288 out of 647 deputies. And of course, this isn't really a free election. The German Nationalist Party added 52 votes to those of the Nazis and gave them a majority of 16. March 23, enabling act passed by the Reichstag. It allowed the government to rule by decree until April 1937. July 14, the Nazi Party declared the only legal party. November 12, 1933 election, 95.2% of votes for the Nazi Party. They got all of the delegates, 661 deputies. By now you have guessed what the next theory or interpretation is concerning the success of Hitler in 1932. Something disastrous had happened in the intervening years since 1928, and it was not uniquely German. The Great Depression of the Western world is the theory. In Germany, it left 1/10 of the population, 6 million unemployed in 1932. Depression made the German people, according to this theory, desperate and irrational in their economic and political thinking. Millions who had supported the Democratic Republic in 1928 now found it impossible of coping with the Depression. Germans who had laughed at Hitler in 1928 now saw him as a prophet and as a savior. For example, aristocratic and small farmers who faced the loss of their land through bankruptcy grasped at the Nazi promise that their interests would be taken care of by Hitler or would be protected. Communism had grown in Germany with the Depression, and the industrialists and the bankers and the small businessmen who feared it and faced economic collapse turned to Hitler, hoping to be able to control him. Generals in the German army, fearing civil war, foreign invasion, are thinking that they could control Hitler and use him again to build a great army. The German Catholics believed his promises to the Pope that German Catholics would not suffer under his regime, and they thought that they would see unity under him, and they feared communism. Protestants also saw there be unity under Hitler and be possible under his rule. The democratic trade unions, what about the workers? They probably would have fought Hitler in normal times, but you don't strike in a time of depression. So the trade unions were, in a sense, helpless. Though a solid majority of the German people still did not vote for the Nazi Party, enough were ready to turn to Hitler in a depression to put him in office. Hitler and his followers knew how to keep power and convert it to a dictatorship once they got their hands on it. And the historian A.P. Taylor gives this example of thugs in a factory. That is, that the owners of the factory hired thugs to take care of the workers. And once the thugs started to work in the factory, the owners soon found out that they also occupied the front office and took over the company. Erich Fromm, in his book Escape from Freedom, sees that in a time of emergency, in a time of disaster, that people escape from freedom and move toward someone who will give them security. Even Spengler, the great German historian at this time, and other intellectuals in Germany saw in Hitler the great hope for a new era. A few years after he came into power, of course, they were very much disillusioned. Is the simple answer to the rise of the power of Hitler the Depression brought him to power? What about other countries that also had depression? United States or England? Why didn't they come under this type of fascist, rightist organization? For one thing, these interpreters say there was no Hitler in America or in England, although there's some controversy on that part. Some people think Franklin Delano Roosevelt was another Hitler. I know my grandfather thought he was the Antichrist. My father thought he was another Jeremiah, and I thought he had an ugly wife. I don't know what that proves, except that there certainly was a generation gap before your generation. Neither country had been defeated in World War I, nor did they have a harsh Treaty of Versailles. Thus, it is not possible to ignore any of the theories we have talked about. Without the Depression, a radical change would not have been called for. But once it happened, all the theories and all other factors came into the picture. Could it be, as Professor Snell has said, Germany's fate or Germany's guilt? Was it more Germany's fate than guilt? The American Historical Association newsletter of April 1964 makes this statement: history will not tell you what to do, will tell you not what to do, but it will surely tell you what not to do. As Professor Strickler has said in his lecture on World War I, it's not communism the danger that we face in America, but it's fascism, a militarist, in a sense, takeover. In a crisis that we're in now in America, is it possible that we will become irrational and look to someone who has the simple solution to many complex problems? You're excused. 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 Excused.